The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the crude wooden building that served as Bodie, California's general store, and Nora Bennett knew she had made a terrible mistake. Through the dust-smeared window, she could see the man who had paid for her passage west, the man whose letters had promised her a respectable home and a chance at a new life. Marshal Ernest Whitmore stood with his arms crossed, his mouth set in a hard line that made her stomach clench with familiar dread. She had seen that expression before on her father's face, on her brother's face, on every man who had ever wielded power over her existence. The look that said she was property, not a person. Nora stepped down from the stagecoach on trembling legs, her worn dress covered in the fine alkali dust that seemed to coat everything in this high desert mining town. It was March of 1879, and spring had not yet fully arrived in this harsh landscape 8,000 feet above sea level. The wind cut through her thin shawl like a knife. "You are late," Marshal Whitmore said without preamble. His eyes swept over her with the same cold assessment a man might give a horse he was considering purchasing. The stage was supposed to arrive yesterday. There was a broken wheel outside of Carson City, Nora said quietly, keeping her eyes lowered. Years of experience had taught her that meeting a man's gaze when he was already displeased only made things worse. The driver had to make repairs. "I do not pay for excuses," Whitmore said. He grabbed her carpet bag from the driver without thanking him and began walking toward a house at the end of the street. "Come, we have wasted enough time already." Nora followed, her heart sinking further with each step. She had been so desperate to escape her brother's household in Chicago that she had answered the mail-order bride advertisement without asking enough questions. After her parents died 2 years ago, she had become little more than an unpaid servant in her brother's home, subject to his wife's constant criticisms and his own volatile temper. When a fever had left her too weak to work for 3 days, he had struck her hard enough to leave bruises and told her she was lucky he did not throw her into the street. The advertisement had seemed like salvation. A respectable lawman in California seeking a wife. The letters had been formal but promised shelter, food, and the protection of his name. She had not expected warmth or affection. She had only hoped for basic human decency. She was beginning to realize she would not even get that much. The house was larger than most in Bodie, a 2-story structure that spoke of Whitmore's position in the community. Inside, it was neat but cold, with bare walls and minimal furniture. He set her bag down in the front room and turned to face her. "The kitchen is through there. I expect breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. My shirts are to be starched and pressed. You will keep this house clean and presentable at all times. I am the law in this town, and my household must be above reproach." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "You are thin. Are you sickly?" "No, sir," Nora said. "I am strong enough to do the work. You had better be. I did not spend good money bringing you here to have you collapse from weakness." He moved toward the door. "I have rounds to make. Unpack your things and prepare supper. There is a pantry stocked with supplies." He left without another word, without asking if she was tired from her journey, without offering her even a glass of water. Nora stood in the center of the cold room and felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. Crying changed nothing. It never had. She found the kitchen and began exploring the pantry, taking stock of what she had to work with. At least there was food. Her brother's wife had often denied her meals as punishment for perceived slights. Here, she could at least eat without permission. As she worked, she heard sounds from outside, the rough voices of men, the creak of wagon wheels, the occasional gunshot echoing off the surrounding hills. Bodie was a mining town, one of the richest gold strikes in California, and it had the reputation to match. They called it the most lawless, wildest, and toughest mining camp the Far West had ever known. Over the past few years, its population had swelled to nearly 10,000 souls, most of them men seeking their fortune in the hard rock mines that honeycombed the hills. Nora prepared a simple supper of salt pork, beans, and biscuits. When Marshal Whitmore returned at precisely 6 o'clock, he sat down without comment and ate in silence. She stood near the kitchen doorway, unsure if she was meant to join him. "Sit down and eat," he said finally, not looking up from his plate. "I will not have people saying I starve my wife." She sat at the opposite end of the table and ate quickly, keeping her eyes on her food. When the meal was finished, he stood and walked toward the stairs. "I will show you to your room," he said. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she felt dizzy. Her own room, a space where she could close a door and have a moment of peace. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small dresser. It was more than she had hoped for. "We will discuss the marriage ceremony tomorrow," Whitmore said from the doorway. "I see no point in wasting money on frivolities. A simple service with the justice of the peace will suffice." "Yes, sir," Nora said. He closed the door, and she heard his footsteps moving down the hall to what she assumed was his own bedroom. She sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry quietly into her hands. 3 days later, she stood before Justice of the Peace Harold Granger and became Mrs. Ernest Whitmore in a ceremony that lasted less than 5 minutes. There were 2 witnesses, both men she did not know, both looking bored by the proceedings. No one smiled. No one offered congratulations. When it was done, Marshal Whitmore escorted her back to the house and left immediately to attend to his duties. Nora threw herself into the work of maintaining the household. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, polished furniture that did not need polishing, and cooked meals that her new husband ate without comment. Days passed, then weeks, and she began to understand the particular prison she had entered. Marshal Whitmore was not a man who struck with his fists, but his words were carefully chosen to cut and diminish. He never raised his voice, but his cold observations about her inadequacies were constant. "This stew is bland. Did your mother not teach you to cook properly? You have missed dust on the windowsill. I expect more attention to detail. Must you be so clumsy? You knocked into the table like some graceless child." Each criticism landed like a small stone, and over time, those stones built a wall around her heart. She stopped speaking unless spoken to. She moved through the house like a ghost, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. She had not heard a kind word in years, not since her mother had been alive, and she was beginning to forget what kindness even felt like. It was late April when she first saw him. She had ventured out to the general store to purchase thread for mending. Marshal Whitmore counted every penny she spent and required detailed accounting, but he had grudgingly agreed that thread was a necessary expense. The store was crowded with miners and townspeople, and she kept her head down, trying to avoid notice. In a town like Bodie, where women were vastly outnumbered, a respectable married woman had to be cautious. She was examining spools of thread when she heard a voice behind her. "Madam, you dropped this." She turned to find a man holding out her handkerchief, which must have slipped from her reticule. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a warm brown, and when he smiled, the expression reached all the way to those eyes in a way that seemed genuinely kind. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking the handkerchief and immediately turning back to the thread. "You are welcome," he said. There was a pause, and then he added, "That is a beautiful color blue you are looking at. It matches your eyes." Nora froze. She could not remember the last time anyone had said anything beautiful about her. She glanced up at him, startled, and found him still smiling gently. "I am sorry if I spoke out of turn," he said. "I just thought you should know." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing there with her heart pounding in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. That evening, as she served supper, Marshal Whitmore looked at her with narrowed eyes. "I heard you were speaking to a stranger at the general store today." Nora's hands trembled as she set down the serving dish. "A man returned my handkerchief that I had dropped. I thanked him. That was all." "See that it remains all," Whitmore said coldly. "My wife will not give people cause for gossip. You will conduct yourself with appropriate modesty at all times." "Yes, sir," she whispered. But that night, alone in her small room, she allowed herself to remember the stranger's words. Beautiful. He had called the color of her eyes beautiful. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a candle flame in the darkness. She learned his name 3 days later when she overheard 2 women talking outside the dry goods store. He was Kieran Palmer, a ranch hand who worked at the double bar spread about 5 miles outside of town. He came into Bodie once or twice a week for supplies, and had a reputation as a hard worker and a decent man. He was 26 years old, had come west from Missouri after the war ended, and kept to himself mostly. Nora told herself it did not matter. She was a married woman, and even acknowledging an interest in another man was inappropriate. But she found herself watching for him whenever she was in town, and her heart would skip when she caught a glimpse of his tall form moving through the crowded streets. A week passed before she saw him again. She was at the butcher's, waiting to be served, when he walked in. He saw her immediately, and that same warm smile crossed his face. "Good morning, madam," he said, moving to stand beside her in line. "It is a fine day, is it not?" "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice low. "Yes, the weather has been pleasant." "I hope you are settling in well to Bodie," he said. "I heard you are fairly new to town." She nodded, unsure how to respond. She was acutely aware of the other people in the shop, any of whom might report this conversation to her husband. "I know it can be a rough place," Kieran continued, his voice gentle. "But there is goodness here too if you know where to look for it. And I think someone with kind eyes like yours will find it." Before she could respond, the butcher called her forward. She completed her purchase quickly and left, her cheeks flushed and her heart racing. Kind eyes. He had said she had kind eyes. That evening, Marshal Whitmore was in a particularly foul mood. A prisoner had escaped from the jail, and he blamed his deputy for carelessness. He came home angry and looking for somewhere to direct that anger. "This house is a disgrace," he said, surveying the spotless front room. "There are cobwebs in the corners. Do you do nothing all day but sit idle?" "I cleaned this morning," Nora said quietly. "I will clean again." "See that you do. I will not have people thinking I cannot manage my own household." He sat down heavily in his chair. "And that dress you are wearing is practically in rags. You make me look like a pauper who cannot provide for his wife." Nora looked down at her dress. It was old and had been mended several times, but it was the best she had. She had come west with very little, and he had not offered to buy her new clothes. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I will see what I can do." "Sorry does not fix anything," he said dismissively. "Now bring me my supper. I have had a long day dealing with incompetence." She served him in silence and then retreated to the kitchen, where she stood with her hands braced against the counter, fighting back tears. This was her life now. There was no escape. She had made her choice when she married him, and the law gave him complete authority over her. She was his property in all but name, as surely as the furniture in his house. But late that night, lying in her narrow bed, she let herself think about brown eyes and a kind smile. She let herself remember what it felt like to hear a gentle word. It was a small act of rebellion, but it was all she had. Over the following weeks, she began to encounter Kieran Palmer with increasing frequency. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but gradually she realized he was timing his visits to town to coincide with her errands. He never approached her directly, never did anything that could be called improper, but he always managed to be nearby, and he always found a way to say something kind. "That is a lovely shawl, madam. The color brings out the roses in your cheeks. You have the most graceful walk of anyone I have ever seen. I hope you know that your smile could brighten even the gloomiest day." At first, Nora was terrified someone would notice and report these exchanges to her husband. But Kieran was careful, always speaking to her in public places where their interactions appeared innocent and brief. And the truth was, she began to need those small moments of kindness like she needed air to breathe. Marshal Whitmore's criticisms had not lessened. If anything, they had intensified. He found fault with everything she did, every meal she cooked, every task she completed. She was too slow, too careless, too stupid to understand simple instructions. She was a burden he had taken on out of Christian duty, and she should be grateful he tolerated her inadequacies. Some nights, after particularly harsh tirades, she would lie in bed and wonder if he was right. Perhaps she truly was as worthless as he said. Perhaps there was something fundamentally broken in her that made her unlovable and unworthy of basic human decency. But then she would remember Kieran's voice saying, "You have kind eyes," and she would hold onto that like a lifeline. It was mid-May when everything changed. Nora had gone to the general store to purchase flour and sugar. Marshal Whitmore had gone through her accounting with his usual meticulous scrutiny, and had given her the precise amount of money needed for the supplies. As she was leaving the store, carefully carrying her parcels, she stepped off the wooden sidewalk and straight into the path of a wagon. She heard someone shout, saw the horses bearing down on her, and froze in terror. Then strong arms grabbed her around the waist and yanked her backward. She stumbled against a solid chest as the wagon rattled past, missing her by inches. "Are you hurt?" Kieran's voice was urgent in her ear, his arms still around her. "Did the wagon strike you?" "No," she gasped, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "No, I am unharmed. Thank you." "Thank you." He released her carefully, steadying her as she found her balance. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. "That was a close call," one of the miners said. "Lucky this fellow was here." "The lady was not watching where she was going," someone else observed. Nora felt her face flush with shame. Of course they would blame her. It had been her fault for being so clumsy. "The wagon came around that corner too fast," Kieran said firmly. "The driver should have been more careful. Are you certain you are not injured, madam?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had dropped her parcels when he grabbed her, and now the flour sack had split, spilling its contents into the dust of the street. "Oh no," she whispered, staring at the ruined flour. Marshal Whitmore would be furious. He had given her the exact money needed, and now the flour was gone and she had no way to replace it. "I will purchase you another sack," Kieran said immediately, reading the distress in her face. "No, I cannot accept," she said quickly. "It would not be proper." "Then consider it repayment for startling you by grabbing you so abruptly," he said. "I am afraid I did not ask permission before laying hands on you. The least I can do is replace what was lost." Before she could protest further, he had retrieved his money and gone into the store. He returned a moment later with a fresh sack of flour and pressed it into her arms. "Please," he said quietly, his brown eyes serious. "Let me do this one small thing." She took the flour because she had no choice. If she went home without it, Marshal Whitmore would want to know why, and she could not afford his anger. "Thank you," she said softly. "You are very kind." "Kindness is free," Kieran said. "I believe everyone deserves to receive it." Their eyes met, and for just a moment, the crowded street seemed to fall away. Nora felt something shift in her chest, a door opening that she had thought locked forever. Then someone cleared their throat loudly, breaking the moment, and she realized they were standing too close, looking at each other too long. She stepped back quickly. "I must go," she said. "My husband will be expecting me." "Of course," Kieran said. He tipped his hat, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. It was longing, pure and simple, and it mirrored the ache in her own heart. She hurried home, her mind spinning. This was dangerous. Whatever was growing between them was impossible, and could only lead to disaster. Marshal Whitmore was not a forgiving man, and the consequences if he suspected anything would be severe. But that evening, as her husband complained about the toughness of the steak she had prepared and implied she had deliberately ruined it to spite him, she found herself thinking about Kieran's words. Kindness is free. Everyone deserves to receive it. Did she deserve kindness? For so long, she had been told she did not. Her brother had said she was a burden. His wife had said she was lazy and ungrateful. Marshal Whitmore said she was inadequate in every way, but Kieran looked at her like she was someone worthy of gentleness and care. The next morning, Marshal Whitmore informed her that he would be traveling to Virginia City for 3 days on official business. He left detailed instructions for her conduct in his absence. She was not to receive visitors. She was not to leave the house except for necessary errands, and those should be completed quickly and efficiently. She was to maintain the household and have a hot meal ready for him when he returned. "I will hear about it if you misbehave," he warned. "People in this town know you are my wife, and they will report to me if you do anything to bring shame on my name." "I understand," she said quietly. After he left, the house felt different. The oppressive weight that normally pressed down on her lifted slightly. She went about her chores, and for the first time in months, she found herself humming softly as she worked. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Kieran Palmer standing on her porch, his hat in his hands. "Madam, I am sorry to disturb you," he said. "But I wanted to check and make certain you suffered no injury from your scare yesterday. Sometimes people do not realize they are hurt until later." She should have sent him away. She knew that. But instead, she found herself saying, "That is thoughtful of you. I am well, truly." "I am glad to hear it," he said. He made no move to leave. "I also wanted to say that I think you are the bravest person I have ever met." She stared at him, startled. "Brave? I am not brave. I am frightened all the time." "Being brave does not mean you are not frightened," he said gently. "It means you keep going even when you are afraid, and I can see that you do that every single day." Tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her face away, mortified. "I am sorry," Kieran said immediately. "I did not mean to upset you." "You did not upset me," she said, her voice breaking. "It is just that no one has said anything like that to me in such a long time. I had forgotten that people could be kind." There was a long silence. When she dared to look at him again, his expression was full of a tenderness that made her heart ache. "You deserve kindness," he said softly. "You deserve so much more than what you have been given." "I should not be talking to you like this," she said, wiping at her eyes. "My husband would be very angry if he knew you were here." "I know," Kieran said, "and I will leave if you ask me to, but I want you to know something first. I come to town as often as I do because I hope to see you. I time my errands to match when I think you might be out. I look for you everywhere I go because seeing your face makes my whole day better. And I know I have no right to feel that way about a married woman, but I cannot seem to help it. Nora's breath caught in her throat. "You should not say such things." "I know," he said again. "But I think you should hear them anyway. I think you should know that someone sees you, really sees you, and thinks you are remarkable." "I am not remarkable," she whispered. "I am just trying to survive." "That is what makes you remarkable," he said. He took a step back, putting proper distance between them again. "I will go now, but I hope you will remember what I said. You are worthy of kindness and respect and love. Never let anyone make you believe otherwise." He left before she could respond, walking down the street with his long, easy stride. Nora closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. Everything he had said was inappropriate. She was a married woman, and he had essentially declared his feelings for her. She should be scandalized. She should be angry. Instead, she felt alive for the first time in years. Over the next 3 days, while Marshal Whitmore was gone, Kieran found reasons to stop by the house. He never stayed long, never came inside, never did anything that could be called truly improper. But he always had something kind to say. "Your hair looks lovely today. The sun brings out the gold in it. I saw wildflowers blooming on the hillside and thought of how much beauty they have, just like you. You have the most wonderful laugh. I hope you know that." Each compliment was a gift she tucked away in her heart. When Marshal Whitmore returned from Virginia City in a foul mood and immediately began criticizing the way she had organized the pantry, she held onto Kieran's words like armor. When her husband complained that the house smelled of lye soap and implied she had used too much, wasting his money, she remembered that someone thought she was remarkable. But she knew this situation could not continue. What she felt for Kieran Palmer was growing stronger every day, and that made it dangerous. She was trapped in her marriage with no legal recourse. Divorce was nearly impossible to obtain and would leave her destitute and ruined. But continuing to see Kieran, even in these brief, innocent encounters, was playing with fire. She tried to avoid going into town. She tried to time her errands for when she thought he would not be there. But somehow, he always found her. And she realized he was doing exactly what he had said, carefully timing his visits to Bodie to match her movements. It was June when Marshal Whitmore struck her for the first time. She had broken a plate while washing dishes. It was an accident, the plate slipping from her wet hands and shattering on the floor. But her husband had been in a rage all evening, angry about a dispute between minors that he had been forced to mediate. When he heard the crash, something in him snapped. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and hit her across the face with an open palm. The blow knocked her sideways into the counter, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. "You clumsy, worthless creature," he snarled. "That plate was part of a set." "Do you have any idea what it cost?" "I am sorry," she gasped, one hand pressed to her burning cheek. "It was an accident. I will be more careful." "You are always sorry, but nothing ever changes." He grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "You are the worst mistake I ever made. I thought a wife would be useful, but you are nothing but an expensive burden." He released her with a shove that nearly knocked her to the floor and stormed out of the house. Nora stood in the kitchen, shaking, the taste of blood in her mouth and terror in her heart. She had known men who beat their wives. Her own father had struck her mother on occasion. But she had hoped, desperately hoped, that Marshal Whitmore would not be that kind of man. Now she knew better. She cleaned up the broken plate with trembling hands and then retreated to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall, feeling the numbness settle over her. This was her life. There was no escape. Even if she ran, where would she go? She had no money, no family who would take her in, no means of supporting herself. And if Marshal Whitmore caught her, if he dragged her back, it would be so much worse. She went to bed that night with her face still aching and her heart heavy with despair. The next morning, she had to go to the butcher's. Marshal Whitmore wanted a roast for supper, and he had given her no choice. She waited until late morning, hoping Kieran would not be in town, and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders despite the warm June day. If she kept her head down and her face partially covered, perhaps no one would notice the bruise. But Kieran was at the butcher's. Of course he was. He took one look at her face, and his expression went from warm greeting to cold fury in an instant. "Who did that to you?" His voice was low and dangerous. "It is nothing," she said quickly, not meeting his eyes. "I had a fall." "That is not from a fall." He stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Did he hit you? Did your husband do this? Please," she whispered, glancing around nervously. No one seemed to be paying attention to them, but she could not be certain. "Do not make a scene. It will only make things worse." "Worse?" Kieran's voice cracked with barely controlled anger. "How could it possibly be worse? He has no right to lay hands on you." "He has every right," she said bitterly. "I am his wife. The law gives him the right to discipline me as he sees fit." "The law is wrong," Kieran said flatly. He took a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to calm down. "Come with me, leave him, I will help you, and go where?" She finally looked up at him, letting him see the despair in her eyes. "I have nothing. No money, no family, nowhere to go. If I run and he finds me, he could have me arrested. Or he could kill me and claim I was an unfaithful wife, and no jury would convict him." "Then I will take you somewhere he cannot find you," Kieran said urgently. "We can go to San Francisco. You can start over there." "With what?" she asked. "I cannot work. No one will hire a woman who has run away from her husband, and even if they did, I could not earn enough to support myself. I would end up in some brothel or starving in the streets." "I would take care of you," he said. "As what?" She shook her head sadly. "Your mistress. That would ruin both of us. You would lose your job and I would be scorned by everyone. No, Kieran, there is no way out of this." "There has to be," he said, his voice desperate. "I cannot stand by and watch him hurt you." "You have no choice," she said quietly. "Neither of us does. Please, just forget about me. Find a nice woman who is free to care for you and live a happy life." "I do not want anyone else," he said. "I want you." The words hung in the air between them. Nora felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I want you too," she whispered. "More than I have ever wanted anything, but wanting does not change reality. I am married to him, and I will be married to him until one of us dies." Before Kieran could respond, she turned and fled the butcher's shop, forgetting entirely why she had come. She ran home through the streets of Bodie, not caring who saw her tears. When she reached the house, she locked herself in her room and sobbed into her pillow until there were no tears left. That evening, Marshal Whitmore came home and demanded to know where his roast was. When she admitted she had not purchased it, he hit her again, this time with a closed fist that blackened her eye and split her lip. "You are utterly useless," he said coldly. "I should have left you to rot in Chicago." She wished he had. She wished she had never answered that advertisement, never come west, never married him. She wished she was dead, but in the darkness of her room that night, broken and aching, she thought about Kieran's words. "I want you." Someone wanted her. Someone thought she was worth fighting for. It was not enough to change her circumstances, but it was enough to keep her breathing through the pain. The next week was a nightmare. Marshal Whitmore's temper had been unleashed, and now he seemed to find reasons to strike her every day. She was too slow with breakfast. She had not swept the porch properly. She had used too much water washing clothes. Each infraction brought another blow, another bruise to add to the collection that covered her arms and ribs. She stopped going into town. She could not bear the thought of anyone seeing her like this, especially Kieran. She sent messages through the delivery boy when she needed supplies, and she stayed hidden in the house like a prisoner. It was Kieran who finally came to her. It was late evening after Marshal Whitmore had left for his rounds. She heard a quiet knock at the back door, the one that opened into the kitchen garden. When she opened it, Kieran was standing there, his face full of worry. "I had to see you," he said. "You have been missing from town for a week, and I have been going out of my mind with fear." "You should not be here," she said, but she made no move to close the door. "Let me see you," he said gently. "Let me see what he has done." She hesitated, then stepped into the light of the kitchen lamp. She heard his sharp intake of breath as he took in the bruises on her face, the split lip that was still healing, the way she held herself carefully to protect her injured ribs. "Dear God," he whispered. He reached out as if to touch her face, then stopped himself. "This cannot continue. You will die if you stay with him." "Then I die," she said flatly. "It does not matter. It matters to me," Kieran said fiercely. "Your life matters. You matter." "Why?" The word burst out of her with more force than she intended. "Why do you care? You barely know me." "I am just a broken, worthless woman who made a bad choice." "You are not worthless," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You are strong and brave and beautiful and kind. You are everything good in this ugly world. And if you cannot see that, then I will spend every day for the rest of my life telling you until you believe it." "He will kill me eventually," she said quietly. "Or I will do something to make him angry enough that he beats me so badly I do not recover. That is my future. There is no changing it." "Then change it," Kieran said. "Run away with me, tonight, right now. We can leave Bodie and never look back." "I already told you why I cannot," she said wearily. "And I am telling you that I do not care about any of those reasons." He took her hands carefully, mindful of her bruises. "I have money saved. Enough to get us to San Francisco and keep us going for a few months while we figure things out. I can find work anywhere. I am strong and I am not afraid of hard labor. And you can work too if you want to. You can be a seamstress or work in a shop or anything you choose." "It is too dangerous," she said, even as her heart yearned toward the possibility he was offering. "Living here is more dangerous," he countered. "He is going to kill you, Nora. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon. And I cannot let that happen. I will not let that happen." She looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his feelings written there. He loved her. This man who barely knew her, who had only spoken to her in brief, stolen moments, loved her enough to throw away everything for her sake. "If we run," she said slowly, "he will come after us. He is the marshal. He has connections. He will not let me go without a fight." "Then we will fight," Kieran said. "Together. We will be smarter and faster and more determined than he is. We will disappear into the wilderness and make a new life where no one knows us." "It is impossible," she whispered. "Nothing is impossible if you want it badly enough." He squeezed her hands gently. "Do you want it, Nora? Do you want a life where someone treats you with kindness and respect? Do you want a chance to be happy?" Did she want it? She had stopped believing happiness was even possible for someone like her. But standing there with Kieran's hands holding hers, looking into eyes that saw her as someone worthy of love, she felt a tiny flicker of hope ignite in her chest. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I want it." "Then come with me," he said. "Right now, before you can talk yourself out of it." "I need to get my things," she said, her heart beginning to race. "You do not need anything from this house," he said firmly. "Just yourself. That is all that matters." But she pulled away and hurried to her room, moving as quietly as possible. She grabbed her mother's locket from the dresser, the only thing she had left of her family, and stuffed it into her pocket. Then she paused, thinking. If she left with nothing, she would be completely dependent on Kieran. And while she believed he was a good man, years of harsh experience had taught her that depending entirely on a man's goodwill was dangerous. She opened the drawer where Marshal Whitmore kept the household money, the coins he gave her for supplies. She hesitated only a moment before taking the small pile of bills and coins. It was not much, perhaps $20 total, but it was something. She told herself she had earned it through months of unpaid labor. When she returned to the kitchen, Kieran was watching the front of the house anxiously. "We need to go now," he said. "Do you have a horse?" "No, my husband does, but it is stabled in town." "Then you will ride with me." He led her out the back door and around to where he had left his horse tied in the shadows. It was a sturdy bay gelding, patient and calm. Kieran helped her mount, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of Bodie, Nora looked back once at the house that had been her prison. She felt no regret, only a strange sense of liberation mixed with terror. She had just destroyed her entire life. If they were caught, the consequences would be catastrophic. Marshal Whitmore could have her arrested for theft. He could have Kieran arrested for adultery and kidnapping. They could both end up in prison, or worse. But as Kieran's arms came around her to hold the reins, as she felt the warmth of his body against her back, she thought perhaps freedom was worth any price. They rode through the night, following rough trails that climbed higher into the mountains. Kieran seemed to know where he was going, guiding the horse with confidence even in the darkness. They did not speak, saving their breath and their energy for the journey. When dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they were miles from Bodie, deep in wilderness where few people ventured. Kieran finally stopped beside a small creek, helping Nora down from the horse. Her whole body ached, not just from her injuries but from hours of riding. She was not used to being on horseback, and every muscle protested. "We can rest here for a bit," Kieran said. "The horse needs water and we should eat something." He had a pack tied behind his saddle, and he pulled out bread and dried meat. They ate in silence, both too exhausted and too anxious to talk much. When they finished, Kieran refilled his canteen from the creek and offered it to her. "Drink," he said gently. "You need to stay strong." She drank, and the cold water felt like a blessing. When she handed the canteen back, their fingers touched, and she felt that now familiar jolt of awareness. "Are you sorry you came?" Kieran asked quietly. She considered the question honestly. "I am terrified," she admitted. "But no, I am not sorry. Even if we are caught, even if everything goes wrong, I will not regret trying to escape." "We will not be caught," he said with more confidence than she felt. "I have been planning this for weeks, ever since I realized how bad things were for you. I know these mountains. I know places we can hide, trails that most people do not even know exist. We will make it to Sacramento, and from there we can take a steamer to San Francisco. Once we are in the city, we can disappear." "You have been planning this for weeks?" she asked, startled. "I could not stop thinking about you," he said simply. "I could not stand the thought of you suffering. So yes, I made plans. I saved extra money. I studied maps. I prepared in case you ever agreed to come with me." She stared at him, overwhelmed. "Why would you do all that for someone you barely know?" "Because from the moment I first saw you, I knew you were special," he said. "I know it sounds foolish. I know you probably think I am crazy, but I have never felt this way about anyone. When I am with you, even just for a few minutes, everything feels right. And when I am not with you, all I can think about is seeing you again." He paused, looking uncertain for the first time. "Do you think I am crazy?" "Yes," she said softly, "but in the best possible way." A slow smile spread across his face, and she found herself smiling back despite everything. For just a moment, the fear and uncertainty fell away, and there was only the two of them beside a mountain creek, looking at each other like they had discovered something precious. Then reality crashed back in, and Kieran stood abruptly. "We should keep moving. Your husband will have discovered you are gone by now, and he will be organizing a search." They rode throughout the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and stretch their legs. The terrain was rough, all steep climbs and narrow trails that wound between towering pines and granite outcroppings. Nora clung to Kieran, trusting him to keep them safe as they navigated the treacherous paths. As evening approached, they found a small cave tucked into the side of a cliff. Kieran deemed it safe enough for a camp, and he helped her down from the horse. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her with careful hands. "Easy," he said. "You have been so brave today. Just a little more." He built a small fire at the mouth of the cave, using dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. Then he spread out his bedroll and insisted she take it. "What about you?" she asked. "I will keep watch," he said. "Someone needs to, and you need to sleep." She was too exhausted to argue. She lay down on the bedroll, and despite the hard ground and the strangeness of sleeping in a cave, she fell asleep almost immediately. She woke once during the night to find Kieran sitting near the fire, his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness beyond the cave entrance. The firelight painted his features in shades of gold and shadow, and she thought she had never seen anyone look so steady and dependable. She fell back asleep feeling safer than she had in months. In the morning, they continued their journey. The landscape gradually changed as they descended from the high mountains, the pine forests giving way to oak and chaparral. The air grew warmer, and Nora found herself sweating beneath her dress and shawl. They saw no one for 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, they encountered a small group of miners heading up into the mountains. Kieran greeted them casually, and the men barely glanced at Nora before continuing on their way. No one seemed suspicious. "We are getting far enough from Bodie that people do not know us," Kieran said once the miners were out of earshot. "That is good. It means we are making progress." They reached Sacramento a week after leaving Bodie. The city was larger than any place Nora had ever seen, full of buildings and people and noise. Kieran found them a modest boarding house run by a widow who asked no questions as long as the rent was paid. For the first time since they left, they had a real bed to sleep in and walls around them. Kieran rented 2 rooms, preserving the appearance of propriety, but that night he knocked softly on her door. "May I come in?" he asked. "I just want to talk." She let him in, and they sat together on the edge of her bed, careful to leave space between them. "We made it," she said wonderingly. "I did not think we really would, but we made it." "We are not safe yet," Kieran cautioned. "Your husband could still track us here. We need to get to San Francisco as soon as possible. But yes, we have made it this far, and that is something to celebrate." "Kieran," she said softly, "what happens now? We cannot live this way forever, running and hiding. Eventually, someone will realize we are traveling together and that I am a married woman. We could both be arrested." "I have been thinking about that," he said. "When we get to San Francisco, we will say you are a widow. We will say your husband died in a mining accident and I am escorting you to relatives in the city. Once we are settled, we can decide what to do next." "You mean whether to live as man and wife without being married?" she said quietly. "I mean exactly that." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know it is not ideal. I know you deserve a proper marriage with all the legal protections that provides. But given the circumstances, I do not see another option, unless you have changed your mind about all of this." "I have not changed my mind," she said quickly. "I just want to make certain you understand what you are giving up. You could have a normal life with a woman who is free to marry you. Instead, you are saddling yourself with someone who brings nothing but complications." "You are not a complication," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I do not want a normal life if it means a life without you. She felt tears prick at her eyes again. "I do not understand why you care so much. I am not special. I am just a scared woman who made a series of poor choices." "You want to know why I care?" he asked. He reached out and gently took her hand. "I will tell you. The first time I saw you in that general store, you looked so sad and alone that it broke my heart. But when you looked up at me, your eyes had this strength in them, this determination to keep going no matter what. And I thought, there is a woman who has survived things that would destroy most people, and she is still standing. That is extraordinary." "I was not trying to be extraordinary," she whispered. "I was just trying not to break." "Exactly," he said. "You have been treated cruelly by people who should have protected you. You have been told you are worthless and inadequate and wrong, but you never believed it, not really. Somewhere deep inside, you knew those things were lies. And you kept going, kept surviving, kept being kind even when the world was not kind to you. That is why I love you, Nora. Because you are stronger than you know, and braver than you believe, and more valuable than you can imagine." The words "love you" hung in the air between them. He had said it. He loved her. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried not to. I tried to convince myself it was wrong and foolish, but I could not help it. You made me remember what it felt like to be treated like a human being instead of a burden." Kieran lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then we will build a life together," he said. "It might not be traditional or easy, but it will be ours. And I promise you, every single day, I will make certain you hear kind words. I will tell you that you are beautiful and strong and worthy of love. I will never let you forget your own value." She moved closer, closing the distance between them, and rested her head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her carefully, mindful of her healing bruises. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself," he said quietly. "You had the courage to leave. I just provided the means." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet boarding house room. Two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. 2 days later, they boarded a steamship bound for San Francisco. Nora stood at the rail as the boat pulled away from the dock, watching Sacramento recede into the distance. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, stepping into a future that was uncertain and potentially dangerous. But Kieran stood beside her, solid and steady, and she felt something she had not felt in years: hope. San Francisco was overwhelming. The city sprawled across hills that descended to a magnificent bay, and the streets teemed with people from every corner of the world. Nora heard languages she could not identify and saw fashions she had never imagined. Kieran guided her through the chaos with confidence, finding them another boarding house, this one in a respectable neighborhood where working people lived. True to the story they had agreed upon, Kieran introduced Nora as Mrs. Bennett, a widow he was helping to relocate after her husband's tragic death. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, was a practical woman who seemed more interested in their ability to pay rent than their personal history. She showed them to separate rooms and informed them that meals were served at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Once they were settled, Kieran began looking for work. He was hired within days by a shipping company that needed strong men to load and unload cargo from the vessels that crowded the harbor. The work was backbreaking but honest, and the pay was decent. Nora, meanwhile, found employment as a seamstress in a dress shop catering to the city's growing middle class. The shop owner, a practical German woman named Mrs. Hoffman, hired Nora on the spot after seeing her neat stitches and attention to detail. They fell into a routine. Each morning, they would eat breakfast together at the boarding house, carefully maintaining the fiction that they were merely friends. Then they would go to their separate jobs, working long hours in the bustling city. In the evenings, they would meet for supper, and then take walks through the city streets, talking about their days and their dreams for the future. It was during one of these evening walks, about 3 weeks after their arrival in San Francisco, that Kieran took her hand openly for the first time in public. "People here do not know us," he said when she looked at him in surprise. "We can be who we want to be." She laced her fingers through his, marveling at the simple pleasure of that contact. In Bodie, even accidental touching had been fraught with danger. Here, no one knew or cared about their history. "I want to be someone who is allowed to love you," she said softly. "Then be that person," he said. "No one can stop you except yourself." As the weeks turned into months, they began to truly build a life together. They moved from the boarding house to a small apartment of their own, a modest 2 rooms on the 3rd floor of a building that overlooked a busy market street. For the sake of propriety and to avoid awkward questions, they told people they were married, Mr. and Mrs. Palmer. It was a lie, but it was a lie that allowed them to live openly as a couple. On their first night in the apartment, Kieran carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It may not be a real marriage," he said, setting her down carefully in the center of the small front room, "but I intend to treat you like my wife in every way that matters." And he did. He was unfailingly kind, thoughtful in ways large and small. He brought her flowers from the market vendors. He complimented her cooking even when she burned the biscuits. He rubbed her shoulders when she came home tired from long hours of sewing. And every single day, without fail, he told her something kind. "You look beautiful in that dress. Your smile is my favorite part of every day. I am so proud of the work you do. You are incredibly talented. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes." At first, Nora did not know how to receive these compliments. Years of criticism had taught her to flinch from attention. But gradually, under the steady warmth of Kieran's affection, she began to heal. She started to believe the things he said. She started to see herself as someone worthy of love and respect. They were happy, truly happy, in a way Nora had never imagined possible. But there was always a shadow hanging over them, the knowledge that their life together was built on a fragile foundation. Nora was still legally married to Marshal Whitmore. If he ever found them, he could destroy everything they had built. 6 months after they arrived in San Francisco, the shadow became reality. Nora was walking home from the dress shop one evening when she saw him. Marshal Ernest Whitmore, standing on a street corner, studying a piece of paper in his hand. He looked older, harder, his mouth set in that familiar grim line. She froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might faint. Then, moving carefully so as not to draw attention, she ducked into a nearby shop. Through the window, she watched as Whitmore showed the paper to a passerby who shook his head and moved on. He was asking about her. He was here in San Francisco, looking for her. She waited until he moved down the street, then slipped out of the shop and ran the 3 blocks to their apartment. She burst through the door, startling Kieran, who was preparing supper. "He is here," she gasped. "My husband. He is here in the city." Kieran's face went pale. "Are you certain?" "I saw him with my own eyes. He had a piece of paper, probably a notice about me running away. He was showing it to people." Kieran set down the pot he was holding with deliberate care. "Then we need to leave, tonight." "And go where?" Nora asked desperately. "He found us in San Francisco." "He will find us wherever we go. Not if we are smart about it." Kieran began pacing, thinking rapidly. "We can go north to Oregon or Washington Territory, or south to Los Angeles, or even east into Nevada and then beyond." "He is a lawman," Nora said. "He has resources. He can send telegrams, contact other marshals and sheriffs. We cannot run forever." Then what do you suggest? Kieran asked, his voice sharp with fear and frustration. Do we just wait here for him to find us? Let him drag you back to a life where he beats you? No, Nora said firmly. But we cannot keep running either. It is not a life, always looking over our shoulders, always afraid. What other choice do we have? Kieran demanded. Nora took a deep breath, an idea forming in her mind. It was dangerous, possibly insane, but it might be their only option. We could confront him. We could try to negotiate. Negotiate? Kieran stared at her like she had lost her mind. The man beat you bloody. What makes you think he would be willing to negotiate anything? Pride, Nora said. He is a public figure, a man who prides himself on his position and reputation. If we threaten to expose what he did to me, to tell everyone in Bodie how he treated his wife, it could damage his standing. He might be willing to let me go if it means protecting his reputation. Or he might just kill us both and claim we attacked him, Kieran pointed out. Maybe, Nora admitted. But what is the alternative? We cannot outrun him indefinitely, and I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of letting him control my life even from a distance. Kieran ran his hands through his hair, clearly torn. I do not like this. It is too risky. Everything is risky, Nora said. Running is risky, staying is risky, but at least this way we have a chance to end it once and for all. They argued for another hour, but eventually Kieran reluctantly agreed. The next morning, Nora wrote a careful letter to Marshal Whitmore, addressing it to the main police station in San Francisco. In it, she requested a meeting at a public location to discuss the dissolution of their marriage. She made it clear that she would not return to him under any circumstances, but that she was willing to discuss terms. 3 days later, she received a reply. Marshal Whitmore agreed to meet at a restaurant near the waterfront at 2 o'clock the following afternoon. I am coming with you, Kieran said when she showed him the letter. I expected nothing less, she replied. They arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early and chose a table where they could see the door. Nora's hands trembled as she waited, and Kieran kept one hand on hers, offering silent support. Marshal Whitmore arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. He saw them immediately and crossed the restaurant with his characteristic rigid stride. When he reached their table, he did not sit down. Instead, he looked at Nora with cold fury. You have caused me considerable trouble, he said without preamble. Do you have any idea the embarrassment you have brought upon me? My wife running away with another man like some common whore. Kieran started to rise, but Nora squeezed his hand, holding him in place. I left because you beat me, she said, keeping her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Because you treated me like I was less than human. I would have died if I had stayed. Melodramatic nonsense, Whitmore said dismissively. I disciplined you when you failed to live up to your duties. That is a husband's right. It is not a right, Kieran said, his voice low and dangerous. It is abuse. And you would know about rights, would you? Whitmore turned his cold gaze on Kieran. A man who seduces another man's wife and convinces her to break her sacred vows. You are a criminal, Mr. Palmer. I could have you arrested. You could try, Kieran said, but I think you would find it difficult to prove anything. We have witnesses here in San Francisco who will attest that Nora has been a respectable widow for months, that I have been helping her as a friend, nothing more. Lies will not save you, Whitmore said. Perhaps not, Nora interjected, but the truth might save your reputation. If this goes to court, if you try to have Kieran arrested or force me to return, I will tell everyone what you did to me. I will show them the scars from your beatings. I will testify in detail about every cruel word, every blow, every moment of terror. And people will believe me because they can see the truth in my face. Whitmore's jaw tightened. You would not dare. I would, Nora said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since he had arrived. "I have nothing left to lose. You took everything from me when you married me. But I have rebuilt my life, and I will fight to keep it." A long silence stretched between them. Whitmore finally sat down, his movements stiff and controlled. "What do you want?" he asked through clenched teeth. "A divorce," Nora said. "I want you to file for divorce on grounds of desertion. You can tell everyone I abandoned you, that I was an unsuitable wife. You can blame me entirely. I do not care what story you tell as long as the end result is that I am free." "Divorce is expensive and scandalous," Whitmore said. "Not as scandalous as a trial where your wife testifies about your brutality," Kieran pointed out. Whitmore's hands clenched into fists on the table. For a moment, Nora thought he might lunge at them, consequences be damned. But he was too controlled for that, too aware of the other diners and the public setting. "Very well," he said finally. "I will file for divorce, but I want something in return." "What?" Nora asked warily. "You will sign a statement saying that you left of your own free will, that I never abused you, and that you are solely responsible for the dissolution of this marriage. You will never speak publicly about our marriage or make any claims against my character." Nora exchanged a glance with Kieran, who gave a tiny nod. "Agreed," she said. "With one condition. You will not pursue Kieran on any charges. You will leave him alone entirely." "Done," Whitmore said. "I will have the papers drawn up within the week. You will come to my hotel to sign them with witnesses present." "Fine," Nora said. Whitmore stood abruptly. "I hope you understand that you are throwing away a respectable life for this man," he said, gesturing dismissively at Kieran. "When he tires of you, when he realizes what a burden you are, you will have nothing. No home, no security, no standing in society." "I would rather have nothing with him than everything with you," Nora said quietly, "because he treats me like I am worth something. And that is more valuable than any material comfort you could provide." Whitmore's face darkened with anger, but he said nothing more. He turned and walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. Nora and Kieran sat in silence for several minutes after he left. Then Nora began to shake, the adrenaline and fear finally overwhelming her. Kieran pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "So brave and strong." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave means doing things even when you are terrified," he reminded her. "And you did it. You stood up to him and won." 1 week later, Nora signed the papers that ended her marriage to Ernest Whitmore. The divorce would take several months to be finalized, but the legal process had begun. She walked out of that hotel room feeling lighter than she had in years. "I am free," she said to Kieran, who was waiting for her on the street. "For the first time in my life, I am truly free." He swept her into his arms and kissed her right there on the busy San Francisco street, not caring who saw. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing. "When the divorce is final," Kieran said, "I am going to marry you properly, with a real ceremony and a real celebration. I want everyone to know that you are my wife and that I am the luckiest man alive." "You are not lucky," Nora teased. "You are crazy for wanting to tie yourself to a woman with such a scandalous past." "Then I am crazy," he said, pulling her close again. "But I am also the happiest I have ever been." The divorce was finalized in January of 1880, almost exactly 1 year after Nora had first arrived in Bodie. The day the papers came through, Kieran proposed properly, getting down on one knee in their small apartment and presenting her with a simple gold ring. "Nora Bennett," he said, "you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You have been through more hardship than anyone should ever have to endure, and yet you have remained kind and hopeful. I love you more than words can express. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a small church, with Mrs. Hoffman from the dress shop and several of Kieran's co-workers as witnesses. Nora wore a simple blue dress that she had made herself, and Kieran wore his best suit. It was nothing fancy, but to Nora, it was perfect. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, when Kieran kissed her as her legal husband for the first time, Nora felt a joy so profound it took her breath away. This man had saved her, not just from an abusive marriage, but from a life without hope. He had shown her that she was worthy of love and respect, and now they had a whole future ahead of them. They honeymooned by taking a weekend trip to the countryside north of San Francisco, staying in a small inn surrounded by rolling hills and ancient oak trees. It was quiet and peaceful, a world away from the bustle of the city and the harsh landscape of Bodie. On their last night there, they sat together watching the sun set over the hills. Kieran had his arm around her, and she leaned into his warmth contentedly. "You ever think about Bodie?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but only to be grateful that we escaped it. I think about how different my life would have been if you had not returned my handkerchief that day," Nora said. "If you had not taken the time to say something kind to a lonely woman in a general store." "I am glad I did," Kieran said, "though I wish I could have spared you all the pain that came after." "The pain was worth it," Nora said firmly, "because it brought me here to you, to this life. I would go through it all again if I knew this was the ending." "This is not the ending," Kieran said, tilting her face up to kiss her gently. "This is just the beginning." He was right. Over the years that followed, they built a life together that was rich in love and happiness. Kieran eventually saved enough money to start his own freight business, hauling goods between San Francisco and the smaller towns of Northern California. Nora continued working as a seamstress, eventually opening her own small shop that specialized in quality garments for working women. They had their first child, a son they named Thomas, in 1881. He had Kieran's dark hair and Nora's blue eyes, and he was the light of their lives. 2 years later, they had a daughter named Margaret, who was as fierce and determined as her mother. And then another son, Daniel, who was gentle and thoughtful. Nora proved to be the kind of mother she had always wished she had. She was patient and loving, never raising her voice in anger, always encouraging her children to be curious and brave. And Kieran was the father every child deserved, present and engaged, teaching his children to ride and work and stand up for what was right. As the years passed, Nora sometimes thought about that frightened, desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Bodie so long ago. She had believed herself to be worthless, broken beyond repair, but she had been wrong. She had always had strength and value. She had just needed someone to help her see it. Kieran never broke his promise. Every single day, without fail, he told her something kind. Sometimes it was a simple compliment about her appearance. Sometimes it was gratitude for the life they had built together. Sometimes it was just a quiet, "I love you" spoken as they settled into bed at the end of a long day, and Nora learned to believe those words. She learned to see herself the way Kieran saw her, as someone strong and brave and worthy of love. She let go of the harsh voices from her past and replaced them with new truths. She was not perfect, but she was enough, more than enough. In 1895, when Nora was 40 years old and Kieran was 43, they took a trip back to Bodie with their children. The once booming mining town had declined significantly as the gold played out. Many of the buildings stood empty, and the population had dwindled to just a few hundred souls. They walked through the dusty streets, Nora pointing out the general store where they had first met. the house where she had lived with Marshal Whitmore. Her children listened with wide eyes as she told them a carefully edited version of her story, leaving out the worst details, but being honest about how difficult those times had been. "You were so brave, Mama," Margaret said, squeezing her mother's hand. "I was terrified," Nora said. "But your father helped me find my courage." "You already had courage," Kieran said, pulling her close. "I just reminded you of it." They learned from a shopkeeper that Marshal Whitmore had died 3 years earlier from a heart ailment. Nora felt nothing at the news, no satisfaction or sorrow, just a distant sense of closure. That part of her life was truly over. As they prepared to leave Bodie, Nora took one last look at the harsh landscape, the weathered buildings, the unforgiving terrain. This place had almost destroyed her. But instead, it had led her to Kieran, to love, to a life she could never have imagined. "Thank you," she said quietly to the empty street, not to Marshal Whitmore or to anyone in particular. Just to whatever force of fate or luck had brought her to this place at exactly the right time to meet the man who would save her life. Then she turned away and climbed into the wagon where her family waited, and they rode out of Bodie together. They returned to San Francisco, to their home and their business and their friends. The years continued to pass, marked by the small joys and sorrows that make up any life. Nora's dress shop thrived, and she gained a reputation for quality work and fair dealing. Kieran's freight business expanded until he employed a dozen drivers and owned a warehouse near the docks. Their children grew up strong and confident, loved by parents who showed them every day what a healthy relationship looked like. Thomas became a teacher, sharing his love of books and learning with the next generation. Margaret married a kind man who treated her with the respect she deserved, and she became an advocate for women's rights. Daniel followed his father into the freight business and proved to have a natural gift for commerce and negotiation. Nora and Kieran grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements slowing, but their love never dimming. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Kieran gave her a locket that matched the one she had taken from Bodie all those years ago. "So you have one for the past and one for the future," he explained. Inside the new locket was a tiny photograph of their family, all of them gathered together in their Sunday best, smiling at the camera. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," Nora said, tears in her eyes. "You gave me the most beautiful gift," Kieran said. "You trusted me with your heart when it was broken, and you let me help you heal. You made me the happiest man alive just by being in the world." In their later years, they would sit together on the porch of the comfortable house they had purchased in a quiet neighborhood, watching the sunset and talking about their memories. Kieran would still find something kind to say every single day, even when they were both so old and familiar with each other that there seemed to be nothing left to discover. "Your eyes still sparkle when you laugh. I love the way you hum while you sew. You made me a better man just by believing I could be one." And Nora would smile and lean her head against his shoulder and thank whatever lucky stars had brought them together. When Kieran Palmer died in 1910 at the age of 58, after a brief illness, Nora mourned him deeply. But she did not fall apart. She had learned too much about her own strength to collapse now. She gathered her children and grandchildren around her and told them stories about their grandfather, about his kindness and his courage and his unwavering love. "He saved my life," she told them. "Not just by helping me escape a bad situation, but by teaching me that I was worth saving. He showed me every single day that I deserved kindness and love, and that is his greatest legacy." Nora lived another 12 years after Kieran's death, continuing to run her dress shop and spending time with her growing family. She became a grandmother many times over, and she made certain that every single one of her grandchildren knew they were loved and valued. On quiet evenings, she would sit alone and look at the two lockets she wore around her neck. One contained a photograph of her mother, a link to the woman who had first taught her what love looked like. The other contained the photograph of her family, the life she had built with Kieran. She would touch both lockets and remember the journey that had brought her from that dusty street in Bodie to this peaceful moment. It had been hard and painful and frightening, but it had also been beautiful. Nora Bennett Palmer died peacefully in her sleep in 1922, at the age of 67. She was surrounded by family who loved her, and her last words were about Kieran. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered to her daughter Margaret, who held her hand as she faded. "Tell him I have so much to share with him. Tell him I never stopped hearing his kind words." At her funeral, her children and grandchildren stood and shared memories of a woman who had survived terrible hardship and emerged stronger. They talked about her kindness, her resilience, her unwavering love for her family. They talked about the lessons she had taught them about courage and hope, and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. And they talked about Kieran, the cowboy who had seen value in a broken woman and had spent every day of his life making certain she knew her worth. The man who had understood that kindness was not weakness but strength. The man who had loved her so completely that his love had transformed not just her life, but the lives of everyone she touched. Their story became a family legend, passed down through generations. A reminder that even in the darkest times, even when hope seems lost, kindness can change everything. That one person choosing to see the good in another, one person deciding to speak gentle words instead of harsh ones, can literally save a life. And somewhere in whatever place exists beyond this one, Nora and Kieran found each other again. And he looked at her with those warm brown eyes and said, "You are beautiful, you are strong, you are worthy of love." And she believed him because she had learned that those words were true. Because he had taught her, one kind word at a time, one gentle day at a time, that she deserved happiness. And together, they had claimed it.